Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Designing a Personal Brand to Grow Your Career, part of the 2020 Alumni Webinar Series. Before we get started, I want to turn things over briefly to Shannon Tim from the Wisconsin School of Business. Shannon?
Thanks, John. Great to be with you and all of our alumni on the webinar today. My name is Shannon Tim, as John mentioned, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at the Wisconsin School of Business. Today's topic on personal branding is one that I think is just becoming more important when we consider really the proliferation of social media, the rise of the gig economy. It's been in the news a lot lately. And I think just how important relationships are in general in business. What I think this comes down to is that building a strong personal brand is just good business. So I'm glad that we have Kat with us today, and I'm looking forward to her presentation. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly share what else is coming up. If we could go to the next slide. We have one remaining webinar on our 2020 calendar with effective delegation strategies on November 17th. And we are in the process of putting together our 2021 calendar, which will be releasing soon. So stay tuned for that. I also want to call your attention to a new event series called Badger Executive Talks. In these events, Dean Sambamurthy invites an executive from our alumni community to discuss their lessons learned in leadership, and they discuss present day business challenges. So it's really interesting. These are conversations that I don't think otherwise people can kind of get insight into, but these are live events, which means that there's also an opportunity for Q&A with viewers. So our next event is on August 26th, next week, and will feature Tom Westricht, who is Vice President and Chief Quality Officer at GE Healthcare. Tom is leading some really interesting projects at GE right now, some of which have been in the news in the last few months, including a partnership with Ford to produce ventilators in response to COVID-19. So we're looking forward to a really great discussion with Tom. For more information on any and all of our upcoming alumni opportunities, you can visit wsb.wisc.edu/alumni, listed on the bottom of the slide here. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to John to get us started.
Thank you, Shannon. Today's webinar is also brought to you by the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development, or CPED. CPED offers online and in-person programs and certificates that will give you the modern, relevant skills needed to advance your career. All of our programs offer interactive learning sessions facilitated by instructors with practical business experience. CPED also partners with organizations to provide customized professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. For more information on the Center for Professional and Executive Development, please visit our website at uwcped.org. If you have questions you'd like to ask during today's webinar, you can submit those questions using the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. You can expand or collapse the control panel using the orange arrow on your screen. We'll pose questions that are submitted during a Q&A at the end of today's webinar. And I also do want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation will be made available within the next few days. And now I'd like to introduce today's facilitator, Kat Shanahan, Senior Director of Strategic Marketing for the Center for Professional and Executive Development at the Wisconsin School of Business. Kat has more than 10 years of experience building brands while creating and implementing strategic brand building experience into helping young professionals set the foundation for building a strong brand to support their long-term career goals. Kat, thank you for joining us today. I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, John and Shannon, for having me, and thank you to everyone attending today's webinar. I'm excited to be here with you and share what I hope will be information that supports you along your career paths. During our time together today, you'll learn what is meant by the term branding, understand why you need to pay close attention to your personal brand, gain practical tips that will help you get started, and discover how you can leverage your personal brand to grow your career. So right now, what I'd like you to do is just take a few seconds and think about a great brand. What popped into your head? Was it a company, a person, an experience, maybe a destination? While all of these have brands, none of them are brands. Over the course of the years, I think the word brand has really become synonymous with company or organization. But a brand is neither one of those things. Anything can have a brand, but none of these things represent what a brand truly is. So let's go back to the company, person, or destination that you thought of just a few seconds ago. And I'd like you to reflect on the first element that popped into your head. What was that? Maybe it was a logo, a picture, or a memory of interacting or engaging with one of those things. Many of us know that a brand is more than just a logo or image that may have popped into our minds. What I want to encourage you to do is push past the next layer of visual representation of the company, a person, or destination you thought of, and really think about the identity behind the visualization that appeared in your mind. An identity is defined as the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. And there are many elements that make up an identity, including memories, experiences, relationships, and values that you've collected over the course of your life. And the key takeaway here is that your identity is internal and something you develop or create. You determine what is most important for you, and you decide your values and what you stand for. Your identity shapes how you act, behave, and what you deem important. The outward facing manifestations of your identity impact your image, which informs other people's perceptions of you. Your image is largely composed of how others view you and interpret those outward manifestations that you're displaying. So I like to think of a brand as living right here, the space where what you say about yourself meets what other people think and say about you. And I do use the word living very, very intentionally. One of my favorite quotes about branding comes from Michael Eisner, who is the former CEO of Disney. And he said that a brand is a living entity, and it is enriched or undermined cumulatively over time, the product of 1,000 small gestures. And there are two things that I love about this quote. The first is that a brand is a living entity. Over time, your brand will grow, change, and adapt, and that's okay. As you establish your career and determine what you want and where you're going, you as a person will change, and your brand changes along with you. The other part of this quote that I absolutely love is that a brand is the product of 1,000 small gestures. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about how you build your brand. And what I want you to remember is that brand building takes time. Thousands of small gestures over time is how you will establish a strong brand that resonates with people. And believe it or not, other people play an integral role in your personal brand. After all, a brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. Marty Neumeier is a thought leader in the world of branding, especially corporate branding. And his stance is that your customers, community, other stakeholder groups of people actually determine your or your company's brand. I believe this is also true for personal branding. You are able to define who you want to be, and your peers, coworkers, friends, and family interpret that information and form their perceptions of you. By the way, if you're looking for a very quick, very informative, and engaging book on branding, The Brand Gap by Marty Neumeier is my absolute favorite. And I think there's even a slide share on the book that you can Google, and it has a lot of information that's in the book. So I highly recommend that. So Marty's philosophy on branding is why I believe that your brand lives in the space between who you are and how you're viewed. Your actions have an opportunity to impact other people's perceptions. And other people may have the power to shape your brand, but they have to react to something in order to build that perception. So it takes both of these pieces to make a brand. If other people are the determining factor of your brand, how is it possible that you can shape their perception? Well, branding. The process of branding is closing that gap between how you want to be viewed and how you're actually being viewed, or what you want your brand to be and what your brand actually is. This is both an art and a science, and it requires you to have influence skills to change how other people perceive you. So let's talk for a few minutes about why this is important. Shannon mentioned earlier how essential branding is in the corporate world, and there are myriad reasons why building that brand is critical. In a few minutes, we're going to go through some of that as it relates to your career path, but I want to take just a second or two to understand why you're here. For some, personal branding is going to be a key factor in helping you rise to higher levels within your organization. For others, you might be focused on building a brand that will allow you to become an entrepreneur and run your own startup. So John's going to set up a poll. Please think about the primary reason why you are here. So you should see that coming up on your screen. And it might overlap. There might be a couple different pieces or a couple different things that you're interested in, but think about the primary reason why you signed up for today's webinar.
All right, Kat, I see the responses coming in. I'm going to give everyone just another moment or two. Okay, let's take a look at the results.
All right. So 46% want to get a new job or become your own boss, 16% a promotion, 40% just thought they should get started, and I'm happy to see no one's in the wrong room. Those are all great places to start. Thank you for setting that up, John. So if you're here because you are looking for a new job, your personal brand can be a tremendous asset that sets you apart from other candidates. And if you're looking to do freelance work, as Shannon mentioned earlier, if you want to become your own boss or create a startup, your brand can differentiate you from other contractors or small businesses. Your personal brand can even help you position yourself better for a promotion if you're trying to stay at the same company but are desiring career advancement. So knowing what you want to accomplish and the question that you just answered is a great place to start on the journey toward refining your personal brand, because this is going to help you become more effective knowing what you want to get out of your brand. So let's get started by talking about how important a personal brand is if you're trying to become an entrepreneur or start your own side business. So your personal brand can help you gain credibility and build a reputation that allows you to more quickly and effectively raise capital. Potential investors want to know that you can build a community and have built trust with your audience, because without these things, it's difficult for investors to visualize your company being a success. Think about the articles that you've read recently. I think one thing is that journalists now know that articles about people get more traction than articles written about companies or facts. People care more about stories than they do about facts. And so a story about a founder or a co-founder is more engaging than a story about facts surrounding how a company was founded. And lastly, community is imperative for entrepreneurs, or if you're just looking to do some freelance work. Not only will building a strong community provide evidence to potential investors that you're charismatic and that you have people that are invested in your success, word of mouth marketing can make or break a small company. By having a strong personal brand, you're one step closer to building those strong relationships that can get you referral business, which is essentially free marketing. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily free, but it doesn't have a hard cost. A community will go a long way in helping you launch your business. And even if you're not looking to start your own business or take on freelance work, community can help you build a professional network and find new opportunities throughout your career. If you're in the job search process, a strong personal brand will help differentiate yourself from other candidates. The trick is that your personal brand online has to translate into the in-person experience. And with today's job market, a strong personal brand and a polished digital experience is no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have. A recent Career Builder survey found that more than half of employers won't hire a potential candidate without some sort of online presence. And a shocking 70% of employers use social media as a way to screen potential candidates during the hiring process. And a point here that I cannot stress enough is the importance of your digital personal brand translating to the in-person experience and vice versa. For a portion of my career, I worked in a student union at UW-Whitewater. And in this position, I supervised a team of 9 student employees in a range of graphic design, video, and marketing positions. And as you can imagine, in these positions, there's a high rate of turnover because the whole purpose of student positions is to prepare them to graduate and get better jobs. So I did a lot of hiring. In my hiring process, I would review a candidate's resume and further evaluate them through the additional resources that they provided. And oftentimes this was a LinkedIn profile, but sometimes it would be a personal website or portfolio site like Behance. After their in-person interview and reviewing the information that they wanted me to, I would Google their name and search for them on social media. This process taught me a lot. Not only was I able to see how important their digital security was to them, I was able to get a pretty good understanding of how authentic they were being in their interview. Having not only a strong personal brand, but authentically translating that into a digital presence is critical in the job search process. For those of you who said that you were here to use your personal brand to achieve your career goals, social media and your personal brand play a critical role here as well. If you're looking to move up to higher levels of an organization, personal brands take on a much more important external focus. So think for just a second about the high profile C-suite executives that you recognize. People like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Oprah, Richard Branson, Arianna Huffington, the list goes on. And if I gave you 5 minutes, I bet you could come up with more names than you realize. These individuals have extremely strong personal brands that are an asset not only to themselves and their careers, but to their company. According to research from Weber Shandwick, global executives attribute 45% of their company's reputation to the reputation of their CEO. Additionally, a CEO's reputation plays an important role in attracting employees to a company, as well as motivating them to stay. As you become a public figure for your organization, and that could even happen before you reach the C-suite, your personal brand plays an important role in helping engage customers and attracting and retaining top talent. What we talked about a few minutes ago regarding journalistic preferences for stories about people applies here too. A strong personal brand can be a way to get good PR for your company. So for those of you who said that you were here because you felt it was important to get started, but didn't have a specific purpose in mind, I hope this helps and outlines why your personal brand is a key component to your career plans and gets you thinking about what kind of goals you might have for your personal brand. So a quick warning as we get started to think about building a personal brand. This process can be pretty difficult. It can be very time intensive. And there may be points where you feel like you're not really getting anywhere, and that's okay. You don't have to have everything 100% figured out right away. You can take time to develop your personal brand. In fact, racing through this process isn't going to be helpful to you either. You have to dig deep. You have to understand who you are, what you want, what you believe in, and how you're leaning into what makes you different and unique. This is a process, so don't rush through it and don't feel like you have to be perfect. Plus, no matter what you've done surrounding your personal brand up to this point in your career, you do have a personal brand. So you're not starting from scratch. Even if you're not consciously building it, you have one because your brand is shaped by how other people view you. So let's dig in. I wanted to share 3 rules or guidelines to frame some of the work that you'll be doing to build your personal brand. As you develop, grow, and adapt your personal brand, make sure that you remain focused, authentic, and consistent. As you've heard time and time again, you can't be everything to everyone. If you try to do that, you end up in a place where you're not truly successful in any one area. When I first graduated with my undergraduate degree from UW-Whitewater and was embarking on a professional career, I thought that I could do everything. I'd majored in multimedia digital arts and advertising, so I had a little experience in video, audio, web design, advertising, and I thought that I had the experience to go into any one of those areas. When in reality, I needed to focus. Trying to appeal to all of those audiences and be everything to everyone was putting me at a disadvantage because I wasn't memorable in any one of those areas. Now, that's not to say that having a wide variety of skills is a bad thing. In fact, that can be a pretty big asset if you're interested in working at smaller companies. The critical mistake I made was not realizing that in order to apply to jobs in audio production, for example, I needed a deep skill set in that area. My lack of specialization in my personal brand at the time wasn't really suited for those types of positions. So having a specific focus will help you create a personal brand that resonates with the people who need it and sets you up for the kind of positions you want. Not only that, but it will make you more memorable because you'll have a clear and focused point of view. Authenticity is critically important when you're building a personal brand. In order to help yourself stand out in a crowded competitive market, You need to lean into what makes you different and what is unique to you. Other humans, like hiring managers, know when you're not being authentic. Remember earlier when I mentioned that I would look at the social media profiles of individuals who are interested in working for me? That didn't stop when I started hiring young professionals. An acquaintance of mine had been looking to do some freelance work for me a couple years ago. She and I had met because a friend of mine worked with her, and soon I was friends with many of the people she worked with. So you could say that I was pretty well acquainted with all of her coworkers and knew the ins and outs of their relationships. She would often take to social media and post very negative comments about her boss and her job, including excessive swear words. Not only was she friends with many of her coworkers, but she was friends with her boss and didn't think twice about posting passive aggressive comments via social media. When it came time for her to inquire about freelance work with me, it made me wonder if she was somebody that I could trust and if our relationship would be the kind where I could receive constructive feedback from her, or if she would agree to something in person and then disagree or complain online. At the time she posted those comments, she wasn't looking for work, but to me, it really spoke of her online personal brand. Was she going to be the same person that she was to my face as she was online? Authenticity and consistency between your in person and online presence is essential. So, consistency really is king when it comes to just about everything, really. Consistency helps reinforce both your authenticity and your focus. Consistency is how relationships develop and build, and how brands are built. Being inconsistent not only hurts your brand building efforts, but it can confuse people. Inconsistency in behavior can lead people to wonder if you're being authentic, and inconsistency in your digital content creation can make employers wonder if you're dedicated. As I mentioned earlier, I've hired a lot of marketing assistants, and if their resume and cover letter told me they loved blogging, they were really dedicated, they had great follow through, but their website and blog hadn't been updated in 9 months, it made me question their authenticity. With this framework in mind, the next step is conducting a brand audit. Brand audit is a self-reflective exercise that's going to help you establish and then narrow down the things that will eventually help you shape your brand. And another warning, this is very, very hard. And I can't say enough how important it is for you to really dig deep and put serious thought into these questions. So right now, I'm going to encourage you to pull out a notebook or sheet of paper. And as we talk through these questions, start writing down the first thing that comes to your mind. You're not going to have this solved by the end of the webinar, but if you have a chance to capture your first thoughts, I'd recommend it. Sometimes getting started is the hardest part, so if you take notes now, you won't be staring at a blank page for very long. The first question you'll want to wrestle with is, who are you? At your core, who are you and why should your audience care about you? Next, think about what makes you unique. How are you different from everybody else? And again, don't be afraid to lean in here. It could be something fun and quirky that you can use to market yourself, like a fun pair of glasses, a unique hairstyle, unique hair color, or it could be something from your past experience that has had a profound impact from you. When I was working at a college campus doing entertainment booking, I met a speaker who was born with no intestines and was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. Despite an initial medical diagnosis that this was incurable, he completely overcame Tourette syndrome, and that story he made an essential part of his brand. He's an amazing inspirational speaker, and his story now differentiates him from other speakers trying to book college shows. Whatever your it is, don't be afraid to lean into it. Think about the goals you have for your personal brand. What is your vision for your personal brand? What do you want it to look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What is the goal with personal branding? As we looked at with the poll, is it career advancement? Is it career transition? Is it setting up a new business? Do you want to someday become a freelancer and be able to control the types of projects that you work on? So it's really important to know where you want to end up, because that'll help you take the next couple steps in that direction. Next, think about your professional goals. How do your professional goals tie into your branding goals? Are there associations you want to join? Do you want to do more volunteer work? Well, personal branding goals are not the same as career goals. The two are closely tied together. One area that I think is often missed is really thinking about your audience. Who are you trying to serve and how can you help them? Your audience is a critical part of your personal brand because, as Marty Neumeier says, your audience dictates your brand. Thinking about them now will help you create messaging that will help you influence them during the branding process. Also think about what makes you different. What's your X factor? And this is a little bit different than what makes you unique. If you're in marketing or business, you may be familiar with the term unique selling point, and that's what this is. What can you do for your audience that nobody else can do? Then you need to think about why your audience should trust you. What makes you trustworthy? What have you done to prove that? Think back to the conversation we had about young marketers who said they loved blogging, but their personal website hadn't been updated in months. How does that make somebody more or less trustworthy? So I'm going to give you just a minute here to finish writing any notes that you have. And again, we are going to send out the slide deck, so you will have these questions documented, but wrap up any final thoughts that you have around these. So again, you're not starting from scratch and you're not staring at a blank page when you go to put a little bit more thought into this. Going through this process and taking the time to really understand and refine your answers will give you the tools you need to create your personal branding statement. Your personal branding statement is one or two sentences that very succinctly summarizes what you do best, who you serve, and how you do this uniquely. And I do want to emphasize here uniquely. Really, really dig deep to understand what differentiates you from somebody else. And don't be afraid to lean into that. One of my favorite marketers or writing experts, Anne Handley, talks about the importance of asking why. When you're writing copy, ask yourself why 2 or 3 times to help you dig a little bit deeper to make sure you're communicating what's really important. I would encourage you to share your personal branding statement with a friend and ask them to ask you why. Ask them to challenge you a few times to see if you're really getting to the heart of the statement. It can actually be a pretty uncomfortable process, but the results are very enlightening. As you craft your personal branding statement, remember, it's not a mission statement, it's not a list of career objectives, and it's not your life purpose. It's important to keep in mind that while those things may factor in to how you create your personal branding statement, there is a significant marketing and influencing aspect that is tied to your personal brand. So here's what this looks like in action. I'm going to share an example of a personal branding statement. Chris Smith is the founder of Campfire Effect, a company that helps entrepreneurs uncover what's unique about themselves and tell their story in a profound way. So Chris's statement is, I help entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, and teams discover a powerful new relationship to who they are and what they do through my proprietary methodology called the Campfire Effect. So not only is Chris's statement very concise, it clearly communicates what he does. He helps his audience discover a powerful new relationship to who they are and what they do. Who he does it for, entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, and teams, and why he does it differently than anybody else, because he has his own proprietary method, and it's called the Campfire Effect. So you can clearly see here that his audience is concise, his value is well thought out and defined, and his USP is truly unique to him. If you're interested in using your personal brand to start or grow your own business, it's extremely helpful to have a framework or process that you've created to solve a problem your clients have. It's a very convenient way to differentiate yourself and identify your unique selling proposition. If you haven't developed your own framework, here's another example for you. Chandler Bolt is the founder of Self Publishing School, which focuses on teaching people how to write, market, and publish their first book. So Chandler's statement is, there's a book inside you, and my goal is to help you find it and go from blank page to best-selling author, even if you're busy, idealist, or bad at writing like me. What I love about his personal statement is that his unique selling point, helping people write a book even if they're busy, idealist, or bad at writing, is very relatable, and it makes him more approachable. By saying that he's bad at writing, Chandler has given his audience a preview of his personality while differentiating himself from the competition. And not that you would know this by reading his statement, but he adds credibility to this because he's written 6 best-selling books. Another aspect of Chandler's statement that I really, really like is that his audience and his value are well crafted into his statement. He actually doesn't start his statement by mentioning himself. He starts by mentioning the people he wants to help. And instead of mentioning them by name, he pulls out something really unique about them, the fact that they have a book inside of them. And I think that these elements make his statement more relatable and more impactful. All right, enough about other people. Let's help you get started. So technically, as we've talked about, you've already gotten started because even if you don't intentionally maintain your brand, you have one. Whether or not it's exactly what you want is a different story. My hope with these tips is that you can begin to intentionally build your brand in a way that is reflective of you and will support your career goals. So I've put together 5 tips that will help you take everything we just talked about, all of the true kind of branding and personal brand building solidification tools, and translate this into the digital space and start influencing the people who will determine your brand. So it may seem like an obvious place to start, but according to a tech study done by the Denver Post, of the 75% of US adults who Google themselves, nearly half say the results aren't positive. That's a staggering number considering what we discussed earlier about the hiring process. While it may be more common for potential employers to look at LinkedIn, Facebook, or other specific social media platforms, Google aggregates this information and compiles it into one place. It's easy for employers to use this as a tool to see if you're being authentic or simply trying to clean up your image for a job interview. So make sure that you are regularly running your name through Google and analyzing the results. You'll want to take down anything you don't want seen by potential employers, such as blog posts you may have been required to write in middle school or high school, or pictures your friends tagged you in on social media that you would prefer didn't exist. As you start creating some of the assets I'll show you next, you'll start to see those resources populating Google and improving the digital representation of your personal brand. I would also encourage you to remember to look at the images and not just the search results, because you never know what you'll find there. Social media profiles can actually be an asset to your job search and your online personal brand. The tips I have here are more in line with how you can make the most out of your digital presence. So make sure you're using your full name on all of your profiles, and don't be afraid to make it different. If you have a very common first and last name, but you have a unique middle initial, maybe you'll include that in all of your profiles that you would want somebody to find if they were looking for you. I would also highly encourage you to be consistent. As I mentioned earlier, consistency is key to influencing your audience and building the brand that you want. When filling out LinkedIn profiles, writing in third person can also be very helpful because it improves search engine optimization, which controls what comes up via Google. I also highly recommend including your location when you can, as it helps people find you instead of somebody with the same name living halfway across the globe. One note of caution here, I have seen people who have added their city or their state to their official name. And while I do think that there are occasions where that might be beneficial, for most people it's not necessary. So I'd recommend putting it in website metadata, which we'll talk about in a second, or in the description of your social media profiles. A personal website can be a significant asset to building your brand, and it doesn't really have to be a monumental endeavor. Sites like WordPress make it pretty easy for you to set up a website that will look professional and clean for employers. Again, my advice here is to be consistent and set up your website in a way that you can maintain. If you have unfinished projects or a blog series that clearly you haven't worked on in 3 years, employers may be concerned about your dedication. Even if you're not constantly blogging, having a website can be a way to share additional resources with potential employers, establish yourself as a thought leader, or build a community around a hobby or interest. And many people can use that community to launch a startup or a side job. Regardless of what you put on your website, there are a few easy tricks that can help you optimize your search engine results. The first is including relevant keywords in the metadata, because it can help you have more control over your Google search engine results. Adding simple keywords with your name, your location, and key topics will help you expand your web presence and knock some of that older content off of the first page of search results. And sites like WordPress actually make this pretty easy. It's kind of like the equivalent of adding hashtags to your Instagram post. There's a menu that allows you to do that pretty efficiently in WordPress. Another code trick is to take advantage of something called H1 tags. An H1 tag is how the internet displays headlines on a web page, and your website platform, like WordPress, will most likely have a default H1 format. And so if you use it, you're telling the search engine crawlers what is important on that page, which will help you boost results. Plus, using pre-built features within the system can help your website be more consistent. And so if all of your headlines look the same because you're using that H1 tag, it helps with search results and it helps your website look more consistent. And in most website editors, this is a drop-down menu and there's no coding experience required. So if your audience determines your brand, as we said earlier, it makes sense that you would want to include them as you start your branding efforts. Think back to Chandler's personal branding statement. While it was very, very much about him, it was also about his audience. He was specific about what he could do for his audience. In addition to including your audience in your personal branding statement, think about how else you could reflect them as you start beginning your branding efforts. One way that I've seen this done during the job search is to use the company's mission statement in your cover letter. Including their mission statement not only shows that you cared enough about the position to Google the company and to look at their website, but it gives you an opportunity to tell the company how your personal brand and their mission align. This can be a great way to differentiate you from other candidates. The same theory can be applied if you're trying to build your own audience through speaking engagements and thought leadership. If you're speaking at a conference for a professional association, are there values or keywords that you can incorporate into your content that would make you resonate more? The important thing in here is that you're making it easy for your audience to see the connections between what they value and what you value. The extent to which you do this in your branding efforts is really up to you. You need to find the right balance between what feels authentic to you and what shows investment in the people you're trying to influence. The last tip I want to share with you is about visibility. And I'm calling this one a little bit of a pro tip because you can have a really powerful brand without having 10 to 12 different profiles on 10 to 12 different platforms. If your goal is to establish your brand and use it as a way to build credibility through the job search process, you may not need to have a presence on a dozen different platforms. If you want to start your own business, get hired as a speaker, or establish yourself as a thought leader, you'll want to build your credibility on a variety of platforms. And 10 to 12 is recommended because that's what usually shows up on the first page of search engine results. You can do this through a mix of personal, professional, industry-related websites and social media profiles, and then also having your own website. And making connections in a variety of areas will establish yourself as a thought leader as you build your brand. As you begin to translate your brand into the digital space, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed and frustrated. And as you think about how many sites you want to be on, whether or not you should have a website, I want you to remember that this is about you. Your brand is about you and it needs to be authentic. You need to do what feels right for you. If you can't dedicate time to blogging, don't feature a blog on your website. If you don't understand Snapchat and have no reason to be on it, and I might be talking about myself here, but don't do it. Everything you post leads back to you, so do what feels authentic to you and do what you can do well. It's better to do a few things well than do a lot of things poorly. And remember, your audience can help you decide where you want to spend your time. If your personal branding goals are tied to specific industries or audiences spend their time on specific platforms, start where you know your audience is. Before I open it up for questions, I want to share a few things that you can do to leverage your brand to build your career. As we talked about earlier, the reason for building your brand may be different than somebody else's in this webinar. Plus, the reason for building your brand may even change over the course of time. And it's entirely possible that your personal branding statement will change as well. That's okay. As long as it remains authentic to who you are and who you're serving, you're on the right track. It's completely natural to evolve and change. Thought leadership is a great way for you to establish credibility in a way that prepares you for career advancement or career transition. Publishing articles, engaging in discussions, and sharing resources shows that you're invested in your community and that you're knowledgeable about your industry. This is also a great tactic to use if you're looking to transition into a new industry. If you can't get the experience you want right away, can you write or share articles or engage in discussions in the industry you want to be in? This will help you gain the experience and knowledge you need to support that transition. And thought leadership also helps you build a community. And you may not think that you need a community right now, but even building a community of peers for your professional network is valuable at any stage of your career. By sharing resources and building relationships now, you're setting yourself up for success in the future. Who you know will help open doors for future jobs, speaking engagements, and other opportunities. And the last thing I would encourage you to think about is your personal leadership style. So, one of the ways that you can leverage your personal brand is through thinking about how that translates into your leadership style. You've already done the hard work of starting to think about your personal branding statement. So, think about how that would translate to your leadership statement. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos said that a personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So think about your personal leadership style and what you want your employees to say about you when you're not in the room, what you want your boss to say about you when you're not in the room. And these answers will help you formulate your leadership statement. Fast Company released personal mission statements from a handful of top CEOs, and this is Oprah's. To be a teacher and to be known for inspiring my students to be more than they thought they could be. Now, this doesn't really fit into the structure we discussed earlier, and that's fine because it's Oprah, but it is an inspiring statement of what she wants to be known for. Again, while this is her personal statement, the emphasis is on the audience. I also wanted to share this statement from Amanda Steinberg, founder of dailyworth.com. I think this is an incredibly impactful statement, and it does fit the same structure we were talking about earlier. So if we think about what Jeff Bezos said, this illustrates exactly what people want, what Amanda wants people to say about her when she's not in the room. Amanda's statement is to use my gifts of intelligence, charisma, and serial optimism to cultivate the self-worth and net worth of women around the world. What I think shines through in Amanda's statement is that she is very clear about what makes her unique. Also, her value statement is about her audience. These elements make it an even more impactful statement. So before you can create an Oprah level leadership statement, you really need to start here. And I would encourage you to spend just 15 minutes at some point today or tomorrow thinking about these questions and writing down your thoughts as a way to begin crafting your personal branding statement. And think about how that authentically communicates who you are and helps you get where you want to go. The good news is you already have a personal brand. So now it's about influencing the people that matter so you're seen the way you want to be seen. Thank you all again so much for joining today. And at this point, I will turn it back over to John so we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Kat. And so we are going to open up for questions at this time. We had a few questions come through in the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have questions that you want to ask, please put them in the question box there, which again, you can access by clicking that little orange or red arrow to bring up the sidebar. So again, we had a couple questions come in. So Kat, I have a few I'm going to throw at you if you're ready.
Sounds good, John.
All right, so what is the most important digital or online resource that you've found for your personal brand?
That's a really good question. I think that going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of making sure that your personal brand is really a representation of you, I think websites are really important. This is something that I've kind of struggled with over the course of my career is what to have on my website. Is it a portfolio? Am I trying to share articles and resources? Do I really feel like blogging every month? So I know it can be a lot to think about and a lot to manage, but there are sites like WordPress, like I said, that make it easier. But one of the things that I really love about a website is that it does allow you to share additional resources in the application process if you're looking for a new job. And it does allow you to provide resources to people who need it if you're trying to build a community. And so it is an asset that you own. And so if you're building your presence on social media profiles, if Facebook changes their algorithm or something along those lines, you could lose that audience. But when you have a website, you have more control over it. You have more control over the experience that your users will have. And so I do think that if you're able to dedicate some time into even building a simple website, that can be a huge asset for your personal brand and kind of a home base as you start to branch out into other areas.
Thank you, Kat. Also, you talked a little bit about listing your location in your website metadata and et cetera. Is it still helpful to do that for those who occasionally travel outside of the state or outside of their local area for consulting work or for speaking engagements, or might that limit their visibility?
That's a very good question. I think that you can, again, it's a very personal choice, but I do think that having something in there about, maybe this is where I'm based, but I serve clients all over the world, or I think there are ways to phrase it that give people an indication that where you are in kind of the immediate geographic range that you serve. And I think that this could be important, especially in our current climate with so much being online and with consulting work being online and having the ability to meet with people all over the globe by sitting in your home office. There are people that want that, but then there are people that want that face-to-face piece of it. And so if you can accommodate both audiences by saying, geographically, I serve southeastern Wisconsin, yet I've traveled all over the world and I'm comfortable meeting with clients all over the globe, then you kind of are trying to get the best of both worlds by saying that you can do things virtually in one way, but then do things in person in another way.
All right, thank you. So Kat, what can a person do if they already have a personal brand at work, but it's not what they want it to be?
Another really good question. I think one thing that I would encourage people to do is to really find out or understand what is their personal brand. And this is a very interesting process. I know that there was a program that I took actually through CPED about leadership style, and there was like a 360 assessment where coworkers filled it out, I filled it out, my boss filled it out, my employees filled it out, my whole team. And I got a lot of feedback on my personal leadership style. And it wasn't necessarily information that I could have gotten by myself. And so I think it's important when you're trying to understand or you're worried about your personal brand at work that you get feedback and you ask if you're unsure, or you ask for feedback and open that door, because then you can start really working on, okay, this is how I am viewed at work. This is my personal brand at work. And here are the steps I'm going to take to try to close the gap between how I want to be viewed and how I am viewed. And doing that through, again, those 1,000 small gestures and that consistency over time will help you repair that. But I think it's really hard to start that process if you don't know what your personal brand is from the people that you work with. So I think you have to ask first.
All right, thank you, Kat. And one final question. Do you have any other tips for using your personal brand during a job search and during the interview process?
I think that during the job search and interview process, um, the most critical thing that you can do is show how you and your values align with the company and their values. And so that's why I love incorporating like a company mission statement in your cover letter, or if you've got, leave behinds or something that you have, anything that you can do that feels authentic to you, that shows the relationship between your personal brand and their mission. And like I said, that could be something that you create as a supplement to your application materials. If there was a piece that you created, a writing sample or a business plan or an art project or something that you created that wasn't in your initial pieces, having something new for that interview that really showcases your personal brand can be very helpful.
All right, thank you, Kat. And I said that was the last question. I actually do have one more that came through, if you wouldn't mind tackling that one as well.
No, I'd be happy to.
So for people who have names that are similar to other people's names, or maybe common names, or even people with the same name in a similar geographic area, how important is it to ensure that the Google results they get when they type their name into that search field are actually representative of them and not somebody else that might have that same name and be in the same area?
That's a good question. I actually ran into a very similar situation. There was a woman that I worked with, and we had the same first name, the same last initial. We went to the same university. We had the same undergraduate degree, and we actually had the same hairstyle. So that was a very interesting thing to navigate. And then we started working at the company at almost the exact same time. I think all of our external partners thought we were the same person and just playing a joke on everybody. But I do think that there is something that differentiates you, and whether or not that's your name, or whether or not that is the work that you do, I think you have to focus on what that is. And so if you have somebody like I did that had very, very similar experiences, it became important for me in my personal brand to look at what, and not necessarily that this person is competition, but if we're thinking about it in business and marketing terms, um, there was a little bit of competition. We both got hired, but one of us could have been hired over the other person. And so thinking about what are they portraying online, and what are other people seeing when they look for one or the other of us, helps determine where you might be able to make a different accommodation, where you might be able to have a website that has information specifically about you, or how else you can differentiate yourself from that person. So, I think that your industry would also play very much into this, but really thinking about what is that piece that makes you different and makes you unique, and how can you visually communicate that. And like we talked about, it might be a little bit more tricky with some metadata and things on the website, but find that piece that makes you different than that person and really lean into it.
All right, thank you, Kat. And thank you so much for your time today and sharing your insights with us. And thank you to everyone on the webinar today who joined us. Later this week, you are going to be receiving a link to the survey where you can provide feedback on today's webinar. And we'll also provide a link to view a recording of today's webinar. For more information about the alumni services provided by the Wisconsin School of Business, or to sign up for future alumni webinars, please visit us online at wsb.wisc.edu/alumni. Kat, any final words before we break today?
No, just a big thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you to you, John and Shannon, and for the School of Business.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.